Russia has called on Ukrainian forces to surrender in the eastern port city of Mariupol, where Moscow said a terrible humanitarian catastrophe was unfolding. Key points. About 40,000 of Mariupol's 400,000 residents have fled during the past weeks, authorities say. About 40,000 of Mariupol's 400,000 residents have fled during the past weeks. Authorities say Russia's Colonel-General Mikhail Mizintsev says a humanitarian corridor will be open to allow people to leave Mariupol. Russia's Colonel-General Mikhail Mizintsev says a humanitarian corridor will be open to allow people to leave Mariupol. Ukraine's Deputy Prime Minister Irina Vereshchuk said more than 7,000 people were evacuated from Ukrainian cities through humanitarian corridors on Sunday. Lay down your arms, Colonel-General Mikhail Mizintsev, the director of the Russian National Center for Defense Management, said in a briefing distributed by the Defense Ministry. A terrible humanitarian catastrophe has developed, Colonel-General Mizintsev said. All who lay down their arms are guaranteed safe passage out of Mariupol. Mariupol has suffered some of the heaviest bombardment since Russia invaded Ukraine on February 24. Many of its 400,000 residents remain trapped in the city with little, if any, food, water and power. City authorities said nearly 10% of the city's population have fled over the past week, risking their lives in convoys. Colonel-General Mizintsev said humanitarian corridors for civilians would be opened eastwards and westwards out of Mariupol at 10 a.m. Moscow time on Monday. However, Ukrainian Deputy Prime Minister Irina Vereshchuk later said an agreement had been reached on creating 8 humanitarian corridors to evacuate civilians from besieged towns and cities on Monday, but the city of Mariupol was not among them. She said efforts to reach Mariupol with humanitarian supplies continued to fail. Ukraine won't surrender, deputy says. Volodymyr Zelensky says Russia's actions in Mariupol are a terror that will be remembered for centuries to come. Ukraine was given until 5 a.m. Moscow time to respond to the offer on humanitarian corridors and laying down arms, he said. Ms. Vereshchuk had already rejected the notion. There can be no talk of any surrender, laying down of arms. We have already informed the Russian side about this, she told the news outlet Ukrainian Pravda. Just open the corridor. Previous bids to allow residents to evacuate Mariupol and other Ukrainian cities have failed, or have been only partially successful, with bombardments continuing as civilians tried to flee. Russia and Ukraine have traded blame for the failure to open such corridors in recent weeks. Colonel-General Mizintsev, without providing evidence, said that Ukrainian bandits, neo-Nazis, and nationalists had engaged in mass terror and gone on a spree in the city. Ukraine said it was fighting for its existence, and President Volodymyr Zelensky said on Saturday that the siege of Mariupol was a terror that will be remembered for centuries to come. Colonel-General Mizintsev said Russia was not using heavy weapons in Mariupol. He said Russia had evacuated 59,304 people out of the city, but that 130,000 civilians remained as effective hostages there. He said 330,686 people had been evacuated from Ukraine by Russia since the start of the operation. The Mariupol City Council said on its Telegram channel late on Saturday that several thousand residents had been deported to Russia against their will during the past week. Ukrainian politician Irina said those citizens were being taken for forced labor in remote parts of Russia. They are being relocated to very distant parts of Russia, where they are being forced to sign papers that they will stay in that area for 2 or 3 years and they will work for free in those areas, she said. The statement by the Mariupol authorities also claimed that mobile phones and documents of evacuees have been inspected by Russian troops before sending Mariupol residents to the remote cities in Russia. The Ukrainian government is sending more buses to Mariupol. Ms. Vereshchuk said more than 7,000 people were evacuated from Ukrainian cities through humanitarian corridors on Sunday, more than half of them from Mariupol. She said the government planned to send nearly 50 buses to Mariupol on Monday for further evacuations. Steve McAndrew from the Red Cross said the organization was doing everything it could to reach the people there. The latest we've heard is that there's around 350,000 people kind of trapped in there, he said. My colleagues in the International Committee of the Red Cross are working there with the Ukraine Red Cross. It's very, very difficult for access. It's an intense situation. Civilians as shells hit homes in Kyiv. Russian forces have shelled homes and a shopping center in Kyiv. Meanwhile, shelling hit residential houses and a shopping center in Kyiv's Podol district late on Sunday, reportedly killing at least 4 people, according to local authorities. Ukraine's prosecutor general said at least 8 people were. The Kyiv Department of the State Emergency Service said 4 people had been. According to the information we have at the moment, several homes and one of the shopping centers were hit, Mayor Vitaly Klitschko said on his Telegram channel. Loading. He said rescue teams were putting out a large fire at the shopping center, while other details were still to be confirmed. Was not able immediately to verify the reports on the ground. M to mute, left and right arrows to seek, up and down arrows for volume. Watch 32 seconds 32s footage shows the aftermath of the shelling on Kyiv's Podol district. Further east, an ammonia leak at a chemical plant in the city of Sumy contaminated an area with a radius of more than 2.5 kilometers. Officials said early Monday local time. Sumy Regional Governor Dmytro Zhyvytskyyy later said the leak was contained, but did not reveal what caused it. The Sumy Kimprom plant is on the eastern outskirts of the city, which has a population of about 263,000 and has been regularly shelled by Russian troops in recent weeks. The UN says about 3.4 million people have fled Ukraine to neighboring countries. The UN Human Rights Office said at least 902 civilians had been, as of midnight Saturday, although the real toll was probably much higher. Ukrainian prosecutors said 112 children had been. The UN Refugee Agency said 10 million Ukrainians have been displaced, including some 3.4 million who have fled to neighboring countries such as Poland. Officials in the region said they were reaching capacity to comfortably house refugees. Zelensky says Israel good place for talks. Mr. Zelensky said that Israel was undertaking many efforts to arrange top-level peace talks between his country and Russia and suggested they might take place in Jerusalem. Speaking in his daily video appeal to Ukrainians, after addressing Israel's parliament by video link, Mr. Zelensky said Prime Minister Naftali Bennett had been trying to act as an intermediary between Kyiv and Moscow. Supporters gather in Habima Square in Tel Aviv to watch Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky address Israel's parliament. Of course, Israel has its interests, strategy to protect its citizens. We understand all of it, said Mr. Zelensky, seated at a desk in his trademark khaki t-shirt. The Prime Minister of Israel is trying to find a way of holding talks. And we are grateful for this. We are grateful for his efforts, so that, sooner or later, we will begin to have talks with Russia, possibly in Jerusalem. That's the right place to find peace. If possible. In the past week, Mr. Bennett has intensified his efforts to bring the two sides together, and has spoken on several occasions to both Mr. Zelensky and Russian President Vladimir Putin. Last week, Mr. Bennett flew, in secret, to Moscow to meet the Kremlin leader. Mr. Zelensky, who is Jewish, also addressed again the Russian accusation that he heads an administration that espouses Nazism. Switching from his usual Ukrainian to Russian in his remarks, he said, Russian propagandists have a tough job on their hands today. For the first time, a Ukrainian president spoke to the Parliament of Israel and, by video recording, to the people of Israel, a Ukrainian accused of Nazism by Moscow. This very fact already proves that things are not as Moscow says. M to mute, left and right arrows to seek, up and down arrows for volume. Watch 2 minutes 20 seconds 2 minutes and 20 seconds behind the lens of the devastating images from the war in Ukraine. ABC or Wires.